Hey everybody. This is a recording of at least a practice session for myself uh, for a talk I'm going to be doing called Myth in the Darkness. Uh, so I'm going to start it right now just to give myself a time sink, and if I fail to record it uh, at the actual place itself, a coffee shop, then this will be going on in its stead. So you can leave your comments below. Hopefully, I'll leave a link to our Discord and that kind of thing, so you can give me some feedback. Let me know what you thought. There will be no cat at the coffee shop, unfortunately. I am sorry. So anyway, before we begin, um, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and my journey and why this is so important to me. Because you have to be passionate about something you talk about. At least you should be. You don't have to be. So when I was 30 years old, my wife got pregnant. We bought a house. I just got a promotion at work, and something else happened. I forget what it was. But either way, something came upon us from my wife, and I just got married. That's it. Uh, that's pretty big. So I thought that this is bigger than me. This is a lot of stuff happening at the same time. So maybe I talked to my wife. Maybe we should go to church. I didn't really have a deep spiritual understanding at the moment, but I felt like it's something that seems to be bigger than what we have going on. Maybe that can help out with the process. So we started going to church. We went to church at the open door. While we were going to church, the Jehovah's Witnesses stopped by my place, and they said, we believe in Christ as well. Can we come in? So they talked with me a little bit. I wasn't too sure where they were going in that direction. So I asked my pastor, like, what do you think about them? And he's like, well, they're wolves in sheep's clothing. And I said, well, he didn't have much time to talk at the moment, but do you have any books on the topic? Because I really like reading and I will read about them. And he gave me two books by Walter Martin. One's the Watchtower Society, and I keep forgetting the other one. But they were books about the start and flourishing of the Jehovah's Witnesses, going back where you can reference like microfilm in New York based on court cases and that kind of thing. Like you could really dig into the hard evidence on what they believe and where they came from. I'm like, this is really fascinating. So I that started my journey for apologetics. Maybe not so much as like because apologetics is apologia. That's the Greek word for to give an answer to, and so I wasn't really trying to maybe go after Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not like I'm headhunting for religion, but I wanted to make sure what I knew was true and give me some solid cases as to why I do not go that specific route, like Jehovah's Witness route. So I found this book. I think it was recommended to me by Jesse and Jared Hartman, they're brothers in my church, called Kingdom of the Cults. And that has like everything you could think of in that book. It has like scientism, Scientology. Scientism is actually a thing as well. Uh, has the Mormon faith, a little bit on Catholicism, sort of the Baha'i faith, Jainism, Buddhism, like everything you can think of that's fairly mainstream that's influenced the psychology of mankind throughout the years. Has like everything in there. So that general editor was Ravi Zacharias, and Ravi Zacharias, before his reputation used to have more clout than it does now, he would go to Harvard and Princeton and Yale, and he would give talks like "Why I'm Not an Atheist," and people were hungry for this stuff, dude. It was like packed out audiences. And once he gave his talk, which was very moving, he would stand up there by himself and have Q&A. Like all these from this secular university, have all these people ask him questions constantly, like tough questions that I had never heard, like even thought about, like why'd God put the tree in the garden? Who asked that question? Now, how can okay, this is one that's probably on people's minds. How can a loving God allow so much evil in the world? That's Jehovah's Witness issue. Well, they call it the Christendom, with the world ruled by Christians per se. Um, so they're tough questions, and he answered them in a reasonable way because the assumption with faith usually is you have to believe beyond reason. And I think it sometimes does get to a point there in the postmodernist argument that you can never really know anything, sorta. So here's where we get into tricks with our definitions. How do you find truth? Like, what is truth? Um, that was actually asked of Jesus Christ. Well, the answer I have to finding truth, and I hope you agree with me, is you find truth based on your best evidence at the time, and you have a choice. You can either pursue it and try to get a better, clear version of what truth would be, or you can let the world throw its rendition of truth your way. Does that make sense? So you don't have to pursue truth. The world can just have you. And I mean, one thing I've learned in the past couple of years is you are everybody, every single person here in this room and listening to my voice, you are passionate about what you're exposed to. Now you can choose to expose yourself to something, or you can have the world expose itself to you. The media is like huge on this. You're watching this video, so obviously you're exposing yourself to something, and this will be a part of you, and you can have an emotional reaction to it. And the things you agree with, you tend to be more passionate about. So that's apologetics. It's giving an answer to, because eventually I started saying, well, okay, well, I'm a Christian. I'm comparing everything else to Christianity. How do I know that Christianity is true? And so I went down that road and looked at every single bit of archaeological evidence that was possible. Not a single thing is refuted. Not a single thing has refuted the Bible. The only contradiction that I found, and maybe you can find one differently, because that's an answer I get to when I ask why people aren't Christians. There's too many contradictions in the Bible. There's just one between, I think it's First Kings and First Chronicles, and it's a year that's dated there. That's the only like actual contradiction, and it's in the Bible itself. And that honestly, that could be a different issue altogether than actual like consistent flow within the scripture itself. So then I started asking questions. Now, sometimes when you start reading these deep philosophers, you get into the point where you're reading questions you haven't even thought of, and then you read the answer, which is even more profound. Nietzsche is a good person to read about this. He asks his own questions and then answers them very well. Really cool. If you want to learn how to think, read Nietzsche and think about what he says. I'll be bringing him up a good bit here later on because he's very pertinent to the whole myth paradigm. So one of my questions was, if God exists, which I believe he does, like you could call that bias or whatnot, but if he exists, there should be evidence everywhere, I think, outside of just like Israel in the Bible in that one time, where he has laid his mark, where he has talked to people. Because if we are made in the image of God, we have something etched on us that every single person can agree with. And this led me to read. I recently, listened to Jordan Peterson lectures, and Jordan Peterson read Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell. And if you really see somebody or hear something that somebody says and it inspires you, maybe listen to them, sure, but then read what they read, because that takes you like further and beyond what you could possibly imagine, because they're summarizing what they read. So go to the source. That's great material. So Jordan Peterson read Joseph Campbell. Now Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, specifically Campbell though, wrote about the concept of myth in every culture that ever existed everywhere that he could find. He was like obsessed by it. And the thing with Joseph Campbell though is he doesn't care about evidence, or maybe not so, I think he does care about truth, but he's passed on. But the archaeological evidence doesn't matter. He puts the Christian myth up there with Zeus, like they're the same thing as far as he's concerned. So it tells us the same story. So from that kind of perspective, he kind of answers the question. And one of the things he found that I thought was really neat is there's a time in every culture's history, everywhere, where somebody has a dream, usually a shaman or something. It's a story that's told, that's oral tradition unbroken, specifically in like the Americas, South Americas. But the dream is like something like the hunter is killed or usurped by a person who is either in charge of plants or embodies the plant itself. And once that happened, mankind switched to an agricultural type of society. Instead of just purely hunt, purely nomadic, it was like time to settle down. And I'm like, all right, well that's really interesting, because we were all hunters at some point, and that's also in the Bible, because that's, anybody know the story of Cain and Abel? So Cain offers the sacrifice of grapes. Abel offers the sacrifice of a sheep. Abel has the better blessing. And then Cain is distraught by this. He's like, this should not be. I am also blessed. So then Cain kills Abel because he's jealous of the blessing that Abel got. The plant offering kills the hunter, even though the hunter had like a more noble blessing. And in the, at least in the masculine world, we can understand this. Hunters are something to be appreciated. There's risk out there in the unknown, and you're going to go tame it with a stick, like something like that, right? Or you can just stay at home and you can cultivate. The plants will not try to eat you. You might starve if you get it wrong, or you're at the mercy of the rain. But en masse, it's more reliable than just finding an animal in the wild, something like that. So that's a Cain and Abel story. It's right there in the Bible too, and that happened everywhere. The other thing they found was like there's two things that aren't messed with in every culture that's ever existed, and that's adultery and theft. Ironically, murder is not there. Thou shalt not kill. That's allowed specifically on the things east of Eden, where they start to like it really gets messy once you start reading the history of like child sacrifice and stuff like that. But for the most part, property is sacred, and they might have different definitions of what your wife would be, but that's also sacred, and that's every culture that's ever existed. So there's something etched onto us that's common through the whole human race in the entire globe. Like, how's that possible? And that's almost because these are things that are just about beyond biology, because we have we have options, we have choice. We don't have to do this, but as a society as it comes together, these are the rules that are like generally agreed upon for society to exist. So my point tonight, what I'm going to try to do is talk about myth and the commonalities that unite in myth. Myth is described by Jung as a narrative of primal reality, something like that, because you're talking about how things are, and in story you can get a lot of meaning out of story. So I'm going to tell some stories. I got one from this game called Shadow of the Colossus. I wanted to choose like semi-relevant, maybe in art too, because if there has to be something in the art that calls to you, like in our media, there has to be something that calls to you besides the dopamine rushes that you get from little clings and clanks here and there. There has to be something that calls to you, and we're gonna go over that, which is called. Well, I'll save that for later. I'm gonna go over three stories first, and then I'm gonna try to point out the uniting theme between all three. So we're gonna take it one from Shadow of the Colossus, a video game. We're gonna take one from basically the start of Isshinryu Karate from a guy named Tetsuo Shimabuku, how he started that, and maybe his dream too. We'll see. And then I'm gonna take a song from a band called Tool, who, like the Maynard, also, believe it or not, read Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung. So he has the same kind of mindset, and that's good to know going into his lyrics. So the first one we're going to talk about, we might get to all three of these, we might not. First one we're going to talk about is going to be Shadow of the Colossus. So Shadow of the Colossus opens with the moon, and it's sandwiched. Like at the end of the game, you also see the moon. I'm going to spoil this game, so if you haven't played it, sorry. It was remade for the PlayStation 4. Originally, it was for the PlayStation 2. It's a long time ago when this game came out. So it starts out, you're walking on you're on your horse, riding on this stone bridge, and you have this package on your horse. You get into a building after this long stone bridge, and you put the package on the altar, and it turns out to be a woman. And then she looks pretty dead. Maybe you find out she's dead. And then a voice from on high called Dorman talks to you, and while you're the wanderer, and he says, this woman was sacrificed because she had a cursed fate, and her name is Mono, and the Japanese kanji sign actually translates into object. So you are the wanderer, and the woman is your object. Now seems shallow on the level on the surface, but not really, because she is, that's the destination. This is what you're trying to do. He talks to Dorman, and he says something like, in this ancient land, I was wondering if there's something that could be done to resurrect her. And Dorman says something like, "Is it not the law of mortals that you die once and that's it?" And then he says, "Maybe there's something that can be done, but the sacrifice might be too great for you." And he tells him to go beat up all these colossi, 16 of them, in this ancient land. And there's ruins all over the place. And you can see it. I mean, a picture of it here on this sheet. If you're on my Discord, you'll figure this out. That's you, little horsey down there. That's a Colossus, and that's the size comparison. And there are some tricky creatures, let me tell you. There's not a whole lot. It's a giant, vast area. And as you kill these colossi, as you dissect them, because you want your cat, you want the significant other to be resurrected. It's a hope. It's a glimmer. You have a sword. I don't know, the sword of truth. Who knows what it is? But as you take care of these colossi, the game is amazing. A great atmosphere. As you destroy them, you become darker. Like your character's countenance becomes like literally when you cut them, darkness flies into you. And that's very important. You're breaking down barriers for Dorman, who is the light. He's like, you need to free me. Once you break down those barriers and you get all 16, your tribal leaders, at least you assume they are, go back to the place where you are after you killed the 16 one. Now you have horns growing out of your head. Your eyes are like bright blue. You look like a demon because you've had so much darkness inside of you. They're basically like, what have you done? Like this, you have disturbed the natural order of things. And they shoot you with an arrow in the leg. Then they stab you like you'd stab the colossi. And you get stabbed, and darkness comes out of you. And then suddenly you're Dorman. You're this giant colossus of shadow and hair. It's very weird. And so on his way out, the shaman, what he does is he takes a sword. He casts an enchantment on it and throws it in the water. And light comes out of it. It sucks you and Dorman, or whatever the conglomeration of you are, into the water. And then the lady wakes up. And she looks around, and your horse is there. Your horse fell a good deal, so he has like a broken leg. He leads her to the pool. In the pool, after that you got sucked into, there's now an infant with horns. She picks up the infant and carries it to a garden, which the horse also leads her to. And then the game ends. So that's significant for a lot of reasons. One, because Dorman is actually Nimrod backwards. And if you don't know, Nimrod is from the Tower of Babel. He's the person, or we're not sure if he's a person, people associate him with Moses, depending upon which Jewish scripture you read. Built the Tower of Babel, and they said, come, let us make a name for ourselves. And in ancient Jewish culture, whenever you make a name for yourself, whenever you name something, you are assuming power over it. So that's what mankind wanted to do. And at that time in the Tower of Babel, they were all united under one language. And they were trying to redefine everything, because that's what God said before he confused their language. Now I'm not sure. There's a switch here, because you can make an actual secular argument for this, because we can experience it in real time at the moment. And the switch is, sure, God confused their language, and they parted ways. What we have going on right now in our culture today is I watched the word preference have its definition changed to offensive during the Amy Coney Barrett trials. They changed the definition of the word female in the English language. Because we've gotten so big, we're just literally changing words. And so what is that? That's Nimrod trying to change the rules of reality so that that lady comes back. Because the natural order of things is you die once. That's it. You die. And what happens is, well, he had to sacrifice so much of himself that he's no longer him anymore. And she woke up and she's also cheated because she has no one to help her with this child who she has now and seems obliged to take care of. Obviously has some evil inside him, hence the horns. And as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the versions of the feminine hero. One of the common arguments on abortion, which we can talk about. We don't have to. Is what if the girl's raped? And as far as I'm concerned, and this is my opinion, you're welcome to challenge it later if you wish. Um, the any time your answer to a question is kill the baby, it's a bad question. So she's raped. Well, we better kill the baby. Like that's two murders. You know what I mean? So this is not trying to diminish the horror that goes along with these kind of things. That's tough, man. Good luck with that. You need prayer, blessing, people coming alongside of you. You need to make a wise decision when that kind of scenario happens, because it might happen, right? It's worthy of thinking about. If not for you, then maybe for someone else to help them with it. Terrible things happen in this world. There's definitely evil and tragedy and malevolence, and we have to deal with that. But she picks the child up, and she takes it with her, and that's feminine heroism. You don't have to, but she did. So that's one story. That's the Shadow of the Colossus. The second story, so we'll keep that in the back of our minds, right? The second story is from Tetsuo Shimabuku. So Shimabuku is a martial artist. He studied Goju-ryu and Shorin from three of probably the greatest masters in Okinawa. One of there's only like 5 dojos in Okinawa right now of Isshinryu. There's like thousands in America. So it's spread here like wildfire. So why is that? Well, the most common story told is that Tetsuo Shimabuku was doing a demonstration by pounding 16-inch penny nails. I think they're like this big with his hand into 2x4s. Just wham, wham, in front of a bunch of Marines because they were in Okinawa. They wanted to learn karate. So this guy was maybe 5 feet tall. All these 6 foot something Marines were watching this guy do it. So what happened is he missed and cut his hand. So what he did was he picked up some dirt, put it on the wound, and then just kept going. And that's the story that they tell that kept them interested enough to follow this guy for so long. And it keeps spreading. The Isshinryu karate. I mean, I still take it today. It's pretty awesome. Isshinryu means one heart way, because he studied the I Ching, which I just got, and I'll keep reading. It has to do with fortune telling, astrology, and numbers in the Chinese system. I'll know more when I read more about it. But all things start with one. That's one of the concepts in that book. But they didn't follow him because he was perfect. They followed him because he met with diversity, cut his hand, and continued on. Because he hit something he wasn't supposed to do, did something he wasn't supposed to do, dealt with the pain appropriately, and continued on anyway. Now that's what impressed them the most. That's something. I mean, that's what got Isshinryu spread. That's a very short story. For the sake of time, I think I'm just going to stop with that there. There's also his dream, which we can go about later. I think it's the same thing, but it's a dream format, so it's a little bit different. The last one is a song by Tool called Reflections. Now, this song comes after a song called Lateralis, or Lateralis, however you want to say it, which just screams of adventure. Hence that little chart you have down here. It talks about that when you're at the top. This one talks about it when you're at the bottom. I only have this 2 verses there. I didn't put the first one in. I'll just say it briefly. I have come curiously close to the end, down beneath my self-indulgent, pitiful hole. To feel conceited, I move closer. I may find comfort here. I might find peace within the emptiness. How pitiful, and it's calling me. As far as I'm concerned, that's one of the kind of the riffs on Buddhism, because of the whole nirvana aspect. I might find peace within the emptiness. This is deeply philosophical, because this guy, and psychological, this guy read Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell. So one of the reasons, you guys heard of Freudian psychology? So the difference between Freud and Jung is Jung, when they took a look at the myth stories and the stories of cultures, Freud immediately put it all to sexuality. And just like you're trying to appease your imaginary sky daddy, and you just want to kill your father so you can spend with your mother. everything would be boiled down to sex and sexual drive. And fair enough, you could do that. Jung said no. We have to take these stories seriously. These stories, these myths built cultures up, and they influenced societies to the point where, like, if their god would die, they would die, or vice versa, and they would just be demoralized. And they took the ritual seriously too. A ritual is a way of saying something is greater than the actual act itself because of its significance. We get allegory out of this too. A story that says something else. So that's basically the id. So in Freudian psychology, though he denied God, he was an atheist, he had a very clever concept of how we operate up here. It's the id, the ego, and the superego. So before we go into the rest of that, um, actually I'll explain it on the way. So in the second verse, he says, "Within my darkest moment, fetal and weeping, the moon tells me a secret, my confidant. As full and bright as I am, this light is not my own, and a million light reflections pass over me. Its source is bright and endless. She resuscitates the hopeless. Without her, we are lightless satellites drifting. And as I pull my head out, I am without one doubt. I don't want to be down here soothing my narcissism. I must crucify the ego before it's far too late. Pray the light lifts me out before I pine away." Now, there's a lot to unpack here. I'm not going to do a whole lot of it, but I'm going to at least touch the surface to leave you thinking about this a little bit. So the moon, when you're in your darkest, that's the bottom right here. Death and rebirth. Within my darkest moment, fetal and weeping, the moon tells me a secret. Well, what is the moon? The moon later on tells you it's a reflection of something greater, a reflection of some agency that's not it. But it's like a glimmer of thought. It's something to go back to. It's something to illuminate things around you. I mean, it's what good friends and what mates are for, maybe. To help pick you up when you're down. Or maybe push you. Or prod you. And motivate you. Sometimes they'll kick you in the shin just to get you moving. Sometimes people need that, right? That's the moon. The moon tells you a secret. While you're in your darkest place. So then it talks about the ego. And so the way Freud describes the id, the ego, and the superego is, okay, the id is like your instincts, your sexual drive, your hunger, need for companionship, everything that you can just feel. Like when you're thirsty, who are you talking to? Like, you're thirsty? I should get a drink. And then you use your motor functions to go get them. You don't think about it too much, but you navigate your way to it. So that's the id and the ego. The id is like a horse. It's powerful and strong, and the ego guides the horse. The superego is what makes you feel guilty for making wrong choices. So it's like it's like your consciousness, the thing that says that was right or that was wrong, and it only lives backwards. Like, it kind of has a little bit of a glimmer forwards. That's more your ego's job to figure that out. But the superego is the one that's looking back on your past mistakes or maybe past histories, maybe past relationships, something like that. So that's what the superego is. So here we have the id, the instincts drawing you down into yourself. And if you want a good book to read Into the Nothing. It goes into the whole the process of the downward spiral by Nine Inch Nails, about what happens when you disbelieve in God and disbelieve in story. It eventually leads to like drug overdose and carnality and suicide. Because it's Nietzsche talks about this too. It leads to suicidal nihilism. Nothing matters because there's nothing greater than yourself. And if you can't meet your own needs, well, once you meet your needs, you want to meet even greater needs. And you keep trying to push the envelope until eventually you just either obliterate yourself and you obliterate everybody around you, maybe both at the same time, then you just cease to exist as you are, per se. So that's the id by itself. The ego guides the id. But sometimes the horse needs to drink water. That's the balancing act that's played there. You want to do what's right all the time, go away, but the id is what carries everything, and that's our flesh, right? That's our war with the flesh. That's per Christ that we're constantly trying to fight. And we have to fight that fight because sometimes when a pretty woman walks down the road, if we don't control ourselves, man, there'll be a real mess on our hands. Sometimes there's a bowl of candy over there. Man, I really would love feeling like eating that now, but there's a future me. Maybe I shouldn't. That'd be a bad idea. So that's the superego. The superego looks toward the future more so than the id and the ego. Does that make sense? So he says here, I don't want to be down here and soothe my narcissism. Like the pit, the in depth of myself is not where I want to live and reside. The light from that moon that's greater than me, that's bringing clarity. I have to crucify the ego that brought me here. I have to eliminate that. Basically, that's what joins the two. Because if you don't have it's like the mediator between the two. This is order and this is chaos. Because this will just go to whatever impulse you need to go to, and this is the order that says no. There's a method to this, and it's up to the ego to drive where it is. I hope that makes sense. So I want to, this is basically we need to separate the mind from the body. There needs to be a separation there. So it's crucify the ego before it's far too late. Leave behind this place so negative and blind and cynical. You will come to find that we are all one mind, capable of all that's imagined and all conceivable. So let the light touch you, so that the words spill through and let them pass right through, bringing out all hope and reason before we pine away. So he's advocating for separating the body and the mind and go toward what is above. So what's above? Well, there are a lot of things that are above. Um, you're in a relationship. Do you serve the other person or do you serve the relationship? The answer is the relationship because you want someone you can contend with that will make you better or prod you or do the hard things that need to be done when you're in a relationship. Relationships are huge when it comes to the ego and the superego. And when it comes to people, we are relational beings. It's just how we are. And he describes the id, the instinctual part of us, the part of us that needs to be disciplined and tempered, as negative and blind and cynical. And that makes sense. If you stay in a realm where you just fill your stomach and that's all you live for, that's a very shallow life. And that's a terrible identity. And then he says to once you separate yourself from that, you'll let the light touch you and let the words spill through that they bring out hope and reason. That's articulation. Because it starts out with feeling and ends with articulation. So we're back to the concept of myth, narrative of prime reality, primal reality. So what unites all three of these? Well, it's the hero's journey. It's right down there. This is what Joseph Campbell talked about. That's in myth everywhere. And we can read it down here. It's the start, call to adventure, meeting a mentor, crossing a threshold, trials and failures, growth, new skills, death, and rebirth. So these three stories are different. The first one's a tragedy. Why it's a tragedy? The difference between a comedy and a tragedy. There's the comedy is happy ending. This cycle actually I think it's more of a fractal, but this is good as it is. The cycle continues. Life continues. Journeys continue. What happens in a tragedy is it stops somewhere around here in the bottom. And it stops by choice. You can keep going through the pain. So the first one, her name is Mono. She is the object. He wants to defy being as such, reality itself, to resurrect her. And all of reality is basically turned upside down. At the end of that game, the bridge is destroyed. You can't go back to how things were. He is no longer himself. He's an infant. And now she has to hold him. Things are now flipped upside down. Does she ask for this life? Absolutely not. She was thrust into it. That's also feminine courage and basically the rite of passage for the feminine because women kind of have no choice but to be mothers. But fathers, if you want a good father, he has to want to do it. Good mother, too, to a point, but she will be. Women are vehicles of life. It seems to be more because you're connected psychologically and physically to your child. It seems to be more of more of the feminine to pull consciousness out of darkness. It's more the masculine to strengthen the consciousness. Something like that. That's what it seems like anyway. So that's why it's a tragedy. The second one is actually a comedy, the one of Tetsuo Shimabuku, because he overcame, and because he overcame in that one instance and one demonstration, he now has a legacy all over the place. That's pretty awesome. The song Tool is actually talking about this journey. The first song, Lateralis, I didn't want to add too much on my plate. I wanted to add different stories, different elements. That talks about the concept of adventure when you're in the normal world, I think. And here it talks about when you're down and things are dark, and you have to cruise. You like this. It talks about revelation. This is like Christ also talks about this. It's like you have to die daily. Well, Paul talks about it. You have to die daily, and we do die daily. If anything, you're a different person today than when you were yesterday. You have to cast off dumb you from yesterday, and you pick up smart you from today, and you keep going. That makes sense. Christ said something else like, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. It's better for you to enter into life than to be cast into hell. Enter into life without an arm than to be cast into hell because of your arm. And that's having an object. If life is about an object, then that's where you'll land. And this is where you get to the point of where your identity is. Like, where's your identity? So this is the hero's journey. This is the story that we all live as we go through. And you can even see this in like work environment, right? People that have been here 10 years getting paid more than people that have been there 1 year. Why do they get paid more? Why should they get paid more? Well, because they've been through, you might have been there a year and you can, build a house in the spring. They've been here 10 years. They can build a house and maintain it in the spring, summer, winter, and fall. They've seen a lot. And they know how to deal with a lot too. They've been through, if anything, they can adapt. There's a reason why, and you can trust them. You should be able to trust them at that point. If not, there's something wrong with the system, and there's also little nuances there. But I think that makes sense, right? They've been through a lot of stories. They are carved out on both what to expect and how to perform. That's life. Going down here is also what happened. Like, you start up here at the start, that's being in the womb. And you can do literally nothing, but you'll never grow. Imagine a child who never has to grow up, Peter Pan. Imagine a child who never has to like feed himself. Somebody always feeds him. You guys know what affluence is? I was blown away when I saw that's actually a diagnosable excuse for committing crimes now. You're too affluent. That means you're too rich to know better. No, sorry, that doesn't fly. There's certain things you cannot violate and still have a good society, regardless of affluence. So that's having the story. So what happens if you objectify? What happens if you, instead of going out and thinking you're living a story, you instead go in, you abolish all myth, you abolish all story, and you hold on to nothing but secularism. We are only time plus matter plus chance. Well, I mean, that's where the outworking of like World War II came from, at least, if not World War One. World War II, I'd say more so. And it comes with the death of God, and this is post Enlightenment. It's the idea that there's no such thing as God. It's all time and matter. Science became scientism. Nietzsche also spoke out against that. But Nietzsche said a lot of things, and again, he makes me think a lot. And so he wrote this parable of the madman, which explains exactly what happens when you get rid of transcendent story. Now, he calls him God. You can call it, like, this is where we get tricky with our definitions. God, per se, is, in my definition, I think his too, something outside of time. And I say it's outside of time because it created time. So it's not something that created itself. It was always there. How do we make sense of that? Well, maybe we can't. Need some water. Maybe that's the point. Maybe you're not supposed to make sense of that stuff. So I'm going to read this parable of the madman. It's an allegorical story, but this rings true. And when I first heard this, it blew my mind. For those of you that don't know Nietzsche, he philosophized with a hammer. That's what he would say about himself, which means he's looking for something philosophically could not destroy. And so, like his critique on the concept of enlightenment from Buddha, it was twofold. First off, he said enlightenment is an excuse for inaction. And the second thing he said was to assume enlightenment assumes there's always a veil of illusion around truth. You just can't find it because it's always illusion. And he couldn't buy that. He's like, nah, I'm a conscious being, and I can determine hot from cold. So there's got to be, since we have this concept of being able to determine one, or setting a hierarchy of values, there's got to be a value that's like the highest, something like that. And even that's really not doing Nietzsche justice. So I'm going to read this parable of the madman. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I'm looking for God, I'm looking for God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing together there, he excited considerable laughter. Have you lost him then? Said one. Did he lose his way like a child? Said another. Where is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or emigrated? Thus they shouted and laughed. The madman sprang into their midst and pierced them with his glances. Where has God gone? I shall tell you. We have killed him, you and I. We are his murderers. But how have we done this? How are we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained the earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns? Are we not perpetually falling backwards, sidewards, forwards, in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breadth of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is it not more and more night coming on all the time? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's decomposition? God's to decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, the murderer of all murderers, console ourselves? That which was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet possessed has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe away this blood off of us? With what water could we purify ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we need to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods simply to be worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever shall be born after us, for the sake of this deed, he shall be a part of a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent, and again regarded his listeners. And they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern to the ground, and it broke and went out. I have come too early, he said then. My time has not yet come. The tremendous event is still on its way, still traveling. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds require time, even after they are done, before they can be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. It has been further related that on the same day the madman entered diverse churches, and there sang a requiem, let out and quieted. He is said to have retorted each time, what are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God? So that's nuts. I mean, that gives you something to think about. I get chills every time I read it. But he's making a point, especially in that first paragraph there, when he starts going on, where has God killed him? Or where has God gone? I shall tell you, we have killed him, you and I. We destroyed our story. So there's no right or wrong. There's no up or down. Why is anything anything? We can't even make sense of language without transcendence or something that unites us, that's above us. And that's the madman, one who kills God, one who kills story. Very tough to live in that world. So when you, and I haven't really met very many atheists, at least not hardcore atheists, because usually if you go down that road, it's not a pretty one. You tend to make hell on earth because you're denying something that unites, at least from what I've seen. So when you're looking for a story, which I think everybody has to live in a story, Whether it's one you're telling yourself, it's still one that you're looking at you beyond yourself. That's the superego again. We live by certain things, certain codes, right? Men specifically love to live by certain codes. I don't date ladies with more than two dogs, or I don't buy red cars, or some silly stuff. And this is where we have to negotiate and distinguish between slogan and principle, like how you live. So, principle is eternal. Principle are like Christ's words. The Beatitudes, which we'll be going over here, they're pretty awesome. The things that Christ said, given to Caesar what is Caesar, given to God what is God's. 2,000 years later, separation of church and state. Made in the image of God. That is insane. Our society, though you might have issues with it, if you treat your neighbor like they're made in the image of God, it turns out things are amazing. We are richer now in this country, actually in the planet, than we've ever been in humanity's entire existence. Like before 1835, I think every single person made average of less than $1 a day in today's standards. So that is like wealth. We are the 1% on this planet right now. The 1% of the wealthiest people that have ever existed. That's pretty nuts when you think about it. And that's because you treat people as if they're made in the image of God. Slavery abolished because of this philosophy. The British were the first people to abolish slavery as a country. That's saying something. Why not have slaves? Why not rape? Why not steal? Like when you start to get rid of story and religion that unite, a myth that unites people together and kind of has something greater than them, this is why society exists, you get rid of consequence, so people feel they don't fear it anymore. That's what's been relevant in society. So that's principle. You want principle. Slogans are the dangerous part. Slogans, if you don't know what the word slogan came from, there's two ways you can search for it. I like the Welsh version. It's for Slua Garum. It means battle cry of the dead. Slogans are powerful, but they're ideologic. Ideologic? They form ideologies. They help form ideologies. Because you think you have a little bit of truth, therefore you have all the truth. I'll give you an example. Make America great again. Okay? Are we going to conquer Africa? Like, where does that go? Like, once you start really diving into it, it falls apart right away. My body, my choice. Okay, well, I don't want to wear a mask. No, you can't do that. Sorry. That's a slogan. It's a battle cry of something dead. That goes back to that first story where the woman is the object. She's not life. She's not part of the life cycle, which you could partner with her. She's already gone. You have to move past that. That's tragedy. And that's what happens when you live on a slogan, because it stops. It's not a way to live forward. It's like an aim you're going to. And one of the things I've really found in this world, and maybe you can agree with me or not, is that anytime you identify yourself, like, hi, I'm Chad, the boxer. Hi, I'm a forklift driver. Anytime that is your primary identity, you are identifying yourself with death. Because let's say I'm a sprinter. Well, I'm going to get old. My legs are going to fall off. I'm not a sprinter anymore. What am I now? Hi, I am a dad. Well, my kids grow up, or they might die. That'd be terrible. I'm a husband. My wife might cheat on me. Heaven forbid. I don't want that to happen. Hopefully she won't. But that's a possibility. So how do you survive all that stuff? How do you live forward through tragedy, through like the flood of life, which is coming? And that's Noah. It's one of the stories. It's the story of the flood that you know is coming. Death is coming. Everybody knows it. So identifying yourself within death, well, from now to death, you're identifying yourself with death, not with life. Then we get to the story about Christ. Now, the Christian story is really something. The idea that you pick up the greatest thing that might actually will cause you to suffer, and you carry it all the way to the end. Like, pick up your suffering. Find the heaviest thing you can carry. Pick it up. That's this story right here. The hero's journey. You see something worth saving. You see something worth doing. You go down into the depths of hell with your cross, and then you come back changed. And that was Christ. C.S. Lewis wrote a good bit about Christ. C.S. Lewis was an atheist, and he was an atheist for a while until he started talking with Tolkien. Tolkien was a Catholic, and Tolkien told C.S. Lewis to read it as if it were true, as if it were a true myth, because it turns out there's more evidence that Christ existed and did what he did and said what he said than there is of any other person in ancient history ever. It's not even close. It's like 15,000 documents or something ridiculous like that. Did you know they found the tomb of Caiaphas? I think it was like 1992. Caiaphas was the guy that prosecuted Christ before he was crucified. They found his sepulcher, tomb, or whatever it was. That was they were trying to dig a water park and they found it. It was buried under the ground. Like, what the heck? So they keep finding things like this. They know where Golgotha was. Like, they know this stuff. The thing is about with Christ is it's not the church. When you're trying to study Christ, this is why my second question is like besides God, like, what do you think of Jesus? It's not up to you to go to your church and your church to feed you. It's up to you to accept the gift given and have a relationship with the person that overcame death. Because that's what this is all about. Like, we know it's coming. Our end is going to come. If you're denying that, you're denying reality itself. And that's what we're looking for, the proper myth, the one that maybe gets beyond the concept of death, or at least makes you face it appropriately. And what greater myth than one who fought death and went through it? He didn't circumvent it, he went through it and overcame it and said, if you follow me, do the same thing. That is literally too good to be true. And we know that. Like, it's almost like we think we don't deserve it. We don't take it seriously. But it should be taken seriously. It's serious. So, in his conversion from atheism to theism, C.S. Lewis writes this. He writes, now the story of Christ is simply a true myth. A myth working on us in the same way as the others, but with this tremendous difference that it really happened, and one must be content to accept it in some way, remembering that it is God's myth, where to the others are men's myths. The pagan stories, God expressing himself through the minds of poets, using such images as he found there, while Christianity is God expressing himself through what we call real things. Therefore, it is true, not in the sense of being a description of God that no finite mind could take in, but in the sense of being the way in which God chooses to appear to our faculties. The doctrines we get out of the true myth are, of course, less true. They are the translations into our concepts and ideas of that which God has already expressed in a language more adequate, namely the actual incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection. Does this amount to a belief in Christianity? At any rate, I am now certain, A, that this Christian story is to be approached in a sense as I approach other myths, and B, that it is most important and full of meaning. I am also nearly certain that it really happened. So if you don't know C.S. Lewis, I think he read every single book written every single thing written in the 15th century, something like that. It was ridiculous how much this guy read. And he would be, like, his library was massive, and you could start reading a paragraph in a book, like they did this as a game, and he would finish the paragraph for you. Like, his mind was incredible. And he wrote Chronicles of Narnia, because stories are how you convey truth. Through myth, through story. And the story does not affect you at all unless it follows this hero's journey. And the hero's journey, the one that we have that's best presented to us, is Christ himself. But there's a lot surrounding that. It's almost like truth is so sacred it's guarded by a whole bunch of lies. So why don't you go to church? I don't like the pastor. Too much corruption. Well, church isn't really the goal. Christ is. Bibles are everywhere. It's plentiful. What do you think of what Christ said? So the last thing I'm going to go over is some of the words that Christ said, namely the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes don't make sense unless life is your goal, continual life, eternal life. Otherwise, they stop. So this is Matthew 3 or 5, 3 through 10, I think. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are those who mourn, for you will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for you shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for you shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for you should obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for you shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for you shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So I'm just going to run through this hero's journey. You could put them all right here. Blessed are the poor in spirit, because the moon is there. For theirs is the kingdom of God. If life continues, you're poor in spirit, keep going. You will come back. Blessed are those who mourn. If you come back after you mourn, you suffer a death or a tragic loss, even the loss of a limb, you come back a new person, able to withstand. You're a monster. You can withstand anything. You survive this, live past it. Don't live in it, because there's the first thing they tell you, if like for women specifically, if they're raped, don't let that define you. That is not you, because there's a temptation to be stuck in your victimhood and you never live. You need to live past that, and now's the time to think about it before you even get into it. You have to prepare for tragedy, otherwise it's going to blindside you, because you know it's coming. It's coming for everybody. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So, the meekness is interesting. It's the assumption that you have power, but you don't use it. So, how does this work? Well, the best example I can come up with is you're in an argument with your significant other. You can say something that will absolutely devastate them, and you will win the argument, but you will die because you're destroying the relationship. The relationship is what this cycle is about. It's one of the things it's about, by the way. So what do? You save the relationship by not using your power, because power and truth and reason are two different things. You save the relationship. That's what you do, and you'll inherit the earth. And the earth is strongly feminine. There's a reason why God says the church is his bride, the called out ones. It's not a building. The church is that's from the German translation of the word church, ecclesias. It's actually meant the called out ones. It's not a specific building per se. It's just the German translation that got us in there. But his bride is feminine because we are reality. We are material. We're reality. We're beautiful to him. We are worthy of chasing. That's the whole Old Testament, especially the latter prophets. Like, we should know our worth, and we should listen so that we can guard ourselves, because we are holy, we are sacred, we are worthy of saving. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? Because then your neighbor is also worth that. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for you will be filled. There's, in this country specifically, there's so much knowledge of God. We know more about God than anyone ever has. But are you hungry for it? Do you thirst for it? Blessed are the merciful. And I think these last four are how we deal with people more often. First four is how we deal with our internal actions. The merciful, for you shall obtain mercy. If you're merciful and you show everybody you're merciful, when you get down here, sometimes the tendrils of hell will be a little bit merciful as well. You will get your mercy. And when you come back, well, mercy helps life continue. Blessed are the pure in heart, for you shall see God. The pure in heart don't have anything to hold them back. They have been pure. They've, through discipline or whatnot, have retained their innocence, their directive. They'll go right through this real easy. Blessed are the peacemakers. Now, the peacemakers are my favorite because they are literally people that jump down into hell to rescue people. They want to make hell not easier. They just want to help you through it. That's a peacemaker. And that's someone who will, put a gun on and go out patrol the streets from bad guys. Maybe take a bullet for you. That's a peacemaker. Those are heroes. That's crazy awesome. And that's with eternal life in process, because if it's all about saving this life now here, Why would anybody be a police officer? Ever. That doesn't make any sense. That's destroying myth. Maybe you think you're invincible. I mean, you can lie to yourself. That's not reality though. That's why a lot of people in the military often are people of faith, because you have to have like a backup plan, man. What if you die in war? Jeez. The last one is blessed are those that are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Yours is the kingdom of heaven. And that's knowing you're going to be down here, and that sometimes people will put you there and keep you there and even kill you. But you have heaven after that. So I guess my question to you guys as we end is, what story are you living? What story are you in? Is it the story of you, or is it the story of something greater than you? Because all love has a sense of duty to it. It has to. You can't escape it. Otherwise, it's just instinct. That's being in my darkest moment, fetal and weeping, like Maynard was talking about earlier. So, what story are you living in? And now, at least in the lecture, this is when we'll be taking a break, drink some coffee. We'll come back for maybe some Q&A. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. Click like, subscribe to see more in the future, and I'll see you next time. Take care.